Alright, so I know my other video was pretty long. It's very, stream of consciousness, and I don't think I really, elaborated on pretty much most stuff. I don't know, there's so much that goes on in my head that whatever can come out from my mouth at a given time, it doesn't always, not everything that goes on in my mind comes through in words, but especially when I run into, like, several things that I think simultaneously, I get sort of, like, I don't know, kinked up. But, I'm actually kind of, astounded that my friend, he called me, yesterday, as I said, and he said he came out as said he was coming out as an atheist, but he didn't really seem to know, that much about it, or what that really meant. But I think mostly what I wanted to, elaborate on is this concept of the soul, of a soul, or what is a soul, but on a philosophical, sort of pontificating, I don't know, rational sort of, I don't know, like a thought experiment or an argument, or when it comes to like a soul, this thing, I think when it comes to like philosophy, if you know the backstory of philosophy and where it came from and the origins of it and why we have it, it was from the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, but they were men. There really wasn't any women philosophers other than Hypatia of Alexandria, who was in Egypt actually, even though she was Greek. Alexandria was a Greek city in Egypt. But the arguments for this concept of the soul, for example, like when it came to philosophy, because you had back then there were it was many different kinds of cults and religious tribes, temples, polytheism, all kinds of these things, and it was very popular. And people who had somewhat more education began to like think about things about how can we explain things without mythology, because if you actually would examine some of these stories for their religious like dogmas at the time, like, I mean, you can pick up any number of them, like the Titans and Zeus, and they're sort of ridiculous, you know, they're kind of stupid. So they wanted to explain things that were occurring in their world without using, you know, mythological or magical or deity or spirit-based explanations. They wanted to prove it by itself. And this was like before science, which science actually, the original scientific method was, what's his name again? This guy, In al-Haytham or al-Hazan, he was an Arab. Yes, he was an Arab. He was also Islamic. If you knew anything about Islam or people of that time period, you would not be hating on Arabs at all. Like, it's a complete made-up thing that people hate on Arabs right now. I do not. I do not pick on Muslims or Arabs or Middle Eastern people at all. I like them very much. But back to the point. When it came to this argument of like a soul, it was kind of interesting that these people, very rational people, would ponder about, you know, what is it that makes me who I am? Who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? Well, you know, these typical like existential type questions, existence, so on. Well, for example, if, like my daughter, who's home right now, she goes to a piano class, and I've gone to music classes before. Honey, go away. I've gone to music classes before many times. In fact, in New Jersey, it was required that we took different types of musical instrument classes. The one in particular when I was in 3rd grade was called a recorder, which is a type of woodwind or flute-like instrument. And I actually have 3 right now. Currently still, yes, I do. And why is it that in a class of everyone, learning that, you're all taught by the same teacher at the exact same time, and in a music class, the music teacher will take more time with each student, and if someone has more difficulty, they would actually help them and make sure that it sounded right, because if it doesn't sound quite right, you ruin, like one sour note can ruin the whole thing, especially if you're going to be on stage and you're going to be playing, musical songs and so on your recorder. Well, why is it that some people, some persons, will play it, and they'll play it exactly right, exactly correct, and there's nothing wrong with it, okay? And then other people who will play the same thing, and it just sounds better. It just sounds better. And people could say, it's because they're putting feeling in it, or they're putting emotion in it. Yeah, and there's something to that. But then there's even like a part where people who write music, there are people who write and they have something, there's something more to it. There's something that doesn't happen in the other people's music. And then what's very common is that people will say, well, they have soul, they put soul into it. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Or some people will say, well, this music sounds more spirited, or this music sounds more soulful, or even when it comes to art, there's more of these nuances to things, right? And I'm sure we could pick it apart and whatever, but when you're in the experience, when you're experiencing these things, when it's happening in front of you, and it's happened to be multiple times, not just me as an observer, but me as the person who was the artist doing, whether it was speaking, music, singing, motivation, art, dance, I mean, you name it. It could be any number of things. And then the reaction from people, like, the one most especially would usually tend to be like my art, is that people would have this, like, profound sort of reaction to my art. Like, I remember there was trash, and I made like a bird out of it, like at a nightclub. It was like a Haitian nightclub that was like a salsa nightclub. And I didn't know how to relate to these people. And I grabbed the foil and I made a bird out of it, and I had put toothpicks in it and so on. And suddenly it was like, there was this other thing, But even when I tried to show other people, I mean, there were artistic things that I have done with people whom are also my peers who are artists who do the same things I do, but they couldn't do it the way I did. Or there could be other people who did things differently than I did. I mean, what is that? And basically, there were these arguments, especially like these ancient Greek arguments, that there was this something about a person, a human being. Of course, they tend to be more masculine. They would view men as more of a person than a female. A female would be like not actually really a person or something. But whatever. But and that there was this sort of this essence, this factor, which, I mean, I've even seen calculations where people would make calculations of this, like algebraic calculations about, what is it about this person or that person, and I would say that this essence of a person, that would be like what the soul would be. Like, you can't really say for sure what a soul is, but you can. But I think the best way would be like the artists and the poets and the musicians, like, they can understand this sort of thing better or differently than people who are not an artist. But when it comes to like science, I think it's like they can acknowledge that there is something there, or speculate about it, and they can sort of touch upon it, and they can make a calculation out of it, or they can say, well, there's something there, there's something going on there. Like, when it comes to, like, the biology or the anatomy of the human brain, how does it work? Like, what part of the brain is the observer? Well, when we pick apart and we dissect a human brain, we find that there's no part that is an observer. So what is the observer? Who is the observer? Why is it there? Then when you come to other things, like, and this is like kind of one of those things that where you have inconsistencies and things that are accepted sciences that don't agree with each other, and they're both experts in fields, and they completely deny each other. Like, very common with people who I'm friends with still, and I love science very much. That most of the time they will say that your emotions are the result of biochemical substances created by your brain or your glands or your body, everything from peptides to endorphins and a list of things. And that when you're feeling happy or you're feeling sad, it's a result of these chemicals. I kind of run into a bunch of problems with that. Like, when you get into, like, when it comes to, like, the quantum physics stuff, of course, that's the most, I think, the one that everyone usually points to, because they would say that the nature of reality changes as you look at it. So when I'm looking away from it, it's one thing, and when I'm looking at it, it changes, and when you have an expectation, it'll be blah, 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 and so on and so forth. We have lots of these calculations and books and so on written about it. But the thing that I am sort of hung up on is, I don't know if hung up is the right word, but suppose, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I have had this experience. I've read books about this, I've read stories about this, I've watched movies with similar themes, where, I mean, for example, there was an Alicia Silverstone film called Clueless. Okay, now take, for example, the character, what was her name, Cher, and she's basically throughout the movie, it was based on what, Emma or something, it was a famous novel or something, and she's trying to help other people with their lives. She's trying to help other people with their lives, and she's wanting to, like, help them find, like, the perfect man or the perfect lover, or be a beautiful couple, and she's trying to help people find, like, the love of their life, even though they're, like, teenagers, right? And not only is she helping other people with that, but she's also, like, on the search for, like, the perfect man. Like, she wants to, like, give herself to, give her virginity to. So first she goes for this guy who turns out to be gay. And then there's this other friend who wants, who likes this guy who's, like, what, like a skater kid or something. And she's like, no, he's not right for you. You should do this, you should do that. And then as it turned out, like, they were perfect for each other and they were just right for each other. Right? Well, throughout the story, there was this other character who was like her former, stepbrother or something, and he was like, in college, etc., etc., and he wasn't really her brother anymore or whatever, and his name was, Josh, I think it was, and the entire time, she's in denial about how she feels about this person. She's thinking he's gross, he's this, he's that. She's making fun of him, she's making jokes at him, she's always putting him down. But then by the end of the film, she has this, like, epiphany that she actually loves Josh, and that she's in love with Josh, right? And that he is, like, the guy, right? So when you go back to this explanation, which is so popular, like, even if I was to go to the ER, I think probably most of the nurses would also believe this as well, that your emotions are a result of your biochemistry, the chemicals produced within your body, right? So she comes to this epiphany long after the fact of interacting with this person that she is in love with Josh. How is it that she can have a conscious understanding of being in love with someone without having ever felt it, without ever having realized it, if it's chemical based, then she would have already felt it. Okay? She would have already felt it. Okay? But that's where you get into, I think this is like one of those meta topics, like the emotional body, right? The emotional wellness or the emotional content of a person, right? And then you get into an aspect of psychology. And psychology completely can negate so many biological studies, right? You know, and I'm not just talking biology or medical science versus like the physics, because there's many like physicists and quantum physicists whose findings very strongly negate biology, right? Well, how is it that you can feel a certain way about somebody or something and not even know it if emotions are just chemical based? I am more along the lines of thinking that the chemicals produced within the body are not necessarily the cause of the emotion or the emotional feeling, the emotional sensations. I believe that they are a result of an experience, of something. And I believe that there's a complexity that is both through the mind and an aspect of the individual. Because these things are meta, we can't dissect them. And yet, when you have someone like Jung, Freud, several others, you come into these like very interesting yet almost strange topics, which when you examine them actually make sense. So it brings me back to this aspect of like the essence of a person, that variable, that thing that we could call it X, we could call it Y, we could call it Z. It's something there. If we want to call it a soul, if we want to call it an essence, I think that aspect, which is part of, I think, maybe has something to do with conscious awareness. And then you can get into, what was his name? Descartes, what's his name? That French philosopher. But there was this French philosopher. He's probably the most, like, you know, the famous quote, I think, therefore I am. It's actually far more complex than people think. This thing is so slow. But that's where you get into these very fascinating, very interesting areas of thought, of consideration, things that can't be definitively explained or definitively agreed on, but there's something to them. And I think that many times there's the arguments and the counter arguments that are really good. But to be perfectly honest, like, I do gravitate to several people whom are atheists, but not because they are an atheist, because of who they are, like the person that they are, the ideas that they have, the way that they think, the way that they challenge things. And I am not upset by someone who could challenge me with something and say, well, I don't think this is right, and this and this and that. Well, let's say they had 5 different arguments about, like, why they didn't agree with this or that, right? And what if, like, they made really good points? Maybe I didn't agree with all of them. Let's say about half, right, out of 5. It would be, like, maybe 2 points, and then 1 point I maybe kind of did, but kind of didn't, but I could kind of see why they thought that, but I kind of couldn't go for it, right? I love that. You know what? Challenge me. But what I'm not interested in is people whom, like, if I have, for example, proof of something, or if I have a very valid point on something, and you won't hear me out on something, that's what you call cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance means you know that you're wrong, but you're afraid of letting go of your belief or the status quo, and you just interrupt, delay, demonize, etc. Right? That's what I don't have respect for. So, yeah, here we go. Descartes, René Descartes. Here we go. It's French. I can't spell very well. All right. If you really, and I haven't been able to really get into this as much as I would have liked to, but every time I sort of go into it, it's really fascinating, and I can't sleep because I will be up all night looking for material to read through, or videos, or lectures, just on Rene Descartes, and I don't even think I really even scratched the surface. I think I've probably scratched more into just Sigmund Freud than anyone else. I mean, I think probably Carl Jung is more interesting, but the thing with Sigmund Freud is so many people like almost worship him for certain things. He was an atheist as well. But Sigmund Freud, if you're just looking at his body of work, just the things that he's written and produced, you could definitely go, oh, well, this is great, and he really had something going here. But when you actually look at who he really was, his life story, what he went through, and so on, you get an entirely different perspective of what his conclusions actually mean. I mean, by reading his books, you wouldn't know that necessarily that he was somewhat misogynistic and chauvinistic. He was a patriarchal. He didn't care much for women as men. He viewed his basic findings and conclusions were not based on normal, healthy minds. They were based on the insane people or mentally ill, whom he had this need to help these people, like insatiably help these people. Like he couldn't be comfortable with himself unless he was helping his patients who had mental diseases, what at the time was known as mania, and a few other, which are depression, sicknesses, things like that, which today they have not been stigmatized. All right, back to Sigmund Freud again. But Sigmund Freud had this insatiable need or urge to help his patients. But most of his findings or his conclusions were based on that, and the person whom was his equal or maybe his better was his pupil and his friend Carl Jung. But Carl Jung had he had an actual education in philosophy, many other things, and eventually Freud didn't like the idea of being challenged anymore. By the end of his life, he made the people that he associated with sign pledges to him of loyalty and that they would accept anything and everything he said because he said it. I mean, there was a number of issues with Sigmund Freud. He was already a hated person because he said a lot of things which were truthful about sex and so on. But towards the end, he sort of, went off the deep end. But that's the thing with a lot of philosophies and philosophers. It's one thing to read their work and appreciate it for what it is, but you also need to find out about the actual person. Like when it comes to, for example, Hypatia of Alexandria, which I don't even know if anyone watching this has ever even heard of her. She was the first and only woman professor or teacher in charge of the Library of Alexandria, which was in Egypt. It had the finest archives of so many ancient things. It was fantastic. And she first had to, her father was a professor there. And she was actually better at mathematics and many other things than he was, and he even acknowledged it, right? But when she became the teacher, she became that teacher, and she got that job, that position. She had a lot of philosophical ideas, inventions. She came up with fantastic new things, new ideas, concepts. She was very interesting and very interested in many things. But yet, the fact that she could do that job, she never made the case to say, oh, any woman could do this, or women could do this too. No. At the time, it was that she could do that because she was special, because she had specialness. And I find that this happens quite often with a lot of pioneering thinkers or philosophers, and that they have some aspect of them that you need to examine that you can't worship them. You can't just say they are this or this or that. Everybody gets caught up in these little, you know, I guess human pitfalls. So now I realized that talking about, like, I've sort of gone into a tangent about, I don't know, philosophers, Freud and Descartes and so on, but we can talk about psychology, and we can talk about, you could say, well, you're talking more about psychology, Candace. Fine. There's also philosophy, psychology. There's a number of aspects, there's a number of different views and perspectives you need to examine things from. Think about, analyze, self-evaluate or evaluate, re-evaluate. It's helpful, but this concept of, like, when I first began this video, it was about this concept of the soul. And it's not really something I can just do in a single video. It's something that you have to really, really think about and consider, gain different perspectives on. And that's one of those things that I really enjoyed about philosophy. It was all these different perspectives and arguments for or against. Usually it was more for, because I don't know, like, for example, and I believe a lot of these atheist groups will point this out, which for a lot of things, like, I remember they debunked a whole, what do you call it, a bunch of religions that I was looking into. Like, there's some ridiculous ones like Scientology and even Mormonism, and I found that these fundamentalists, or just group mentality atheists, they had fantastic work on debunking these things. It was absolutely wonderful. So when it comes to, for example, like meditation, for example, which has health benefits to you, there's aspects of, like, I guess you would call spirituality, which, I don't know, intersect with biology, or biology negates it. For example, like, if you definitely get into meditation or meditative type things, and there's several different kinds. There's not one specific kind. There's many kinds. I mean, there's yoga, but you don't have to do yoga to meditate. There is a number of, what, Kabbalistic, and even Catholicism has many kinds. And there's even, like, in Japan, where they have, like, where you're physically doing something over and over again, and a breathing exercise. Or in China, Shaolin Kung Fu, stuff like that, right? But the more you do these things, you will have, like, because there's different types of brain waves, and for example, there's alpha waves, there's theta waves, there's delta waves. When you go to sleep and you dream, you feel one way, but I noticed that if you take a quote-unquote nap in the daytime, you can oftentimes have a different kind of experience in the so-called sleeping state. And you can go into these alpha, theta, delta, different, brainwave states. And oftentimes, in my own experiences, when I would go into these states, you have a different kind of feeling. I mean, you get into things like trance, meditation, and so on. But what I come up against, what I've sort of been, I don't know, sort of scraping against or abrasively bumping against, is my questioning of this, of whether am I actually leaving my body? Am I actually experiencing these things that I'm experiencing? I don't know, or is it my brain? Is it a function of my brain for me to have this experience? But it gets stranger, and there's this aspect of these high strangeness type things that happen. I mean, everything from, and I'm not making it up, like light bulbs that just burst, batteries that just suddenly die. I mean, as a result of my doing just meditative stuff, even just taking a nap or whatever. I've had experiences where, this is probably one that was the most interesting, like when I was 18, before I got my car in the fall, I was going to vocational school or high school, which was the same thing for me. It was the same exact thing. And that year, the freshman class, because I was a senior, and the freshman class was the largest class that they had ever had at the school, ever, in the history of that school. It was like this massive, it was the class of 2000, I think it was, or 2001? Well, I was class of 98, so I guess it was class of 2000 or something like that. And there was so many of them, and my class was supposed to be the largest that they had ever had, and of course several had dropped out, but compared to this class, it was my youngest brother's generation, to be exact, actually. They were so rowdy and so rambunctious, and you could say, well, aren't all teenagers going? This was different. This was much different. It was a much different kind of group of youngsters. I mean, it was just, I thought my generation was kind of rambunctious, especially like even when we were freshmen, but this was so much more than my class, the class of 98. And just loud, and if I didn't have people whom, like, it depends. Like, there are circumstances for my life where I could be the loner, where I could be very just in myself and gaze out the window and so on, or daydream, etc. Or I could be the very social person and everyone's my friend and so on and so forth. And I could go in between both. But I just felt like, since I had the longest, it was really unfortunate for me. Like, I was the first person to be picked up in the morning, and the last person to be dropped off in the afternoon. And even though I only lived like less than a 15 minutes drive away, God, the school got out at 3 o'clock, and I sometimes didn't get home till almost 6. So I don't know, had gone through some depressing things in my life, and what I did was I would take naps or dream, or I would do like meditation stuff, because I don't know, it was like fun for me, and at the time I considered myself spiritual. I was getting more and more farther and farther away from my religiousness before that, and I very much liked meditation. I still like meditation, and there's many types, and I like them all, right? But I had many unusual experiences. I mean, some involving time and viewing things from that there's no way I could know, etc. Well, the thing that stood out to me the most is because when you go into this state, you have this sort of feeling. There's these certain kinds of feelings. You could feel it all over. After, let me think about it. Like, in September you go there, it's rowdy, and I thought that this class was just always going to be that way. And every day I would just go, and I would put my legs up, and I would just let my head hang, and so my knees were up, like up on the seat in front of me, and I just had my head down like that, and that was my preferred position to meditate in. I didn't care to sit up straight and cross my legs or whatever, but for me that worked. And I could eventually just go in and out like that, right? Well, by the time it was Thanksgiving, or maybe slightly after, and it was like one of those El Nino years, so it was actually a very warm winter even. I remember there was this profound quietness in the bus, and it was a full bus, and there was just so many of these kids, and the majority of people on the bus were not even class of 98, 99. They were these younger, the freshmen, and was it 2001? Maybe it was 2001 or 2002. I forget. It was that particular group of kids. And this just peaceful quietness. And I realized that everyone else was meditating as well, but they didn't know that they were. They didn't realize they were. Now, you can say, well, that's probably because, your brain waves, you're emitting certain types of brain waves. We can measure that stuff, right? So maybe there's something to that, and I've definitely had aspects where I've meditated, and over a period of time, eventually when I would go to meditate, everyone else would just sort of meditate. Like, they didn't know it. They would fall asleep, or they'd take a nap, or things like that. So maybe there's something to the whole, brainwave thing and so on, right? That's biology, I would say. That would be science. But when you have, like, these other weird things that go on that, I don't know, I can't explain with science. There's, like, telekinesis, but that could be science. Then you get, like, into the weird things, like, precognition, or knowing something before it happens, or literally, like, seeing it before it happens, or, even stranger things. There's a part of this is very common with people who meditate. It's like you start to go into these meditative states, and then what appears to be like some kind of being is speaking with you, or talking with you, or communicating with you, or whatever. And for many people, it becomes very, very real. Even for me, it did. But how do I know that's just not my brain doing that? How do I know that's just not my biology doing that? My brain chemistry. How do I not know that my brain is just not designed to be that way? So, for people whom, and I have been to classes, like yoga classes where atheists go, and they don't believe in any of the spiritual end of things, but they just like all the pretty language and the health benefits and so on, and meditation is very healthy for you, right? But from that, I can't just be... I can't do it. I can't be an atheist. Unfortunately, I'm stuck by default. By default, not that I wanted to be, but by default in this sort of agnostic stance. Because it's agnostic, it's more like you just don't know. I don't know. I feel more sane. I feel better in this neutral area where it's like, I'm not sure, but I'd like to examine this aspect or that aspect, opposing aspects. But I will also even be fair and examine things that I don't like, I can't stand, or things that make me uncomfortable. But I will at least give it a fair shot. Probably more than I think a lot of my friends would care to, or probably think I'm stupid for doing. But I feel better to do it because at least I feel that I was principled enough to examine it rather than just dismiss it. But since it's very common, very popular among self-professed atheists that there's no soul or there's no afterlife, I can't do that. I just cannot do that. It just doesn't. I'm not convinced of that. The reason, I think there's a huge part of my reasoning, another reasoning which I haven't been totally able to reconcile away or peel away from me. I think probably because if I did, it would mean I'd have to deny something that I understand about myself. And I know maybe some people will think will see me as less credible for saying so, but regarding belief or beliefs, I actually do in fact believe in reincarnation. I believe in reincarnation because of a number of things which have occurred in my specific personal life. When I was younger, I would get in trouble if I asked these sort of questions. But it's sort of interesting that, I remember when I was younger, I asked my mother and my father, where was I before I was here, or what was I, and what did I do, and how did I get here? And to me, it just seemed like, I must have been 4, 5, or 6 years old, something about maybe 5 years old. And my parents became really upset with me, very angry with me. And it got into this religious argument, blah, 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 you only have one life, etc., etc. But when I got older, by the time I was in high school, especially the end of high school, both of my parents believed in reincarnation, but they didn't necessarily really believe in the religious stuff that they had previously been believing in. Now, that's not my basis for my belief in it, though. So, let me explain to you why I still believe this. Well, for example, like, if you think about yourself, you think about, like, your past, things that you remember. And I know people will say, like, memory is problematic, etc., and it can be manipulated and so forth and so on. But if you have a memory about something, and it's very... because there are even aspects of people, like, there have been memories I've had of very unpleasant things that I've gone through that I had completely and totally forgotten. And I mean, like, the dark, horrible side of human beings. Everything from just molestation and rape. And I didn't remember them. And if I did, it would be just very briefly or very small part. But I mean, the ones, like, for example, like the molestation one, I didn't remember any of it. I was too young. But there were some things in the memory that I could remember, but I didn't know why. Until later on, events caused me to have a total recall of that. It's not even that big of a deal, honestly. But if I can remember something, if I remember, like, I remember when I bought this phone, and I can remember when first time I was, driving my car. There's many things I remember. You have a memory of something. Well, that's how you remember something, how you recall something, There are cognitive memories, and then there are, like, emotional memories. I remember things from even back when I was 2 years old, and people don't believe me, but I have asked my parents about certain things. I remember, because I'm the kind of person, I go back and I reevaluate myself, and I'll think about things. I just let my mind wander, and then I think about it, and I think about it, and I think about it. And to be perfectly honest, I think if I don't do that, I don't feel healthy. By doing that, it makes me feel healthy. I know a number of astrologers will say, well, that's normal because you're a Virgo, whatever. But when it comes to memories, what about when you have memories that are just as real as any other memory when you remember something, but you're not you that you are now, that you're not the person you are, but you're a different you? Because I've had these. I've had many of these. And no, they weren't necessarily because I was meditating. Like, I don't know if you've ever had a flashback, or people will talk about, oh, this brings back memories, that brings back memories. And I've had this experience, and if you're probably my age, you will most likely have had this many times of, running into someone from the past, like from 10 years ago, and it's like, oh my god, and then you start to have all these flashbacks, and then maybe you've forgotten things, and then just by them, recalling this or that, then it's like all this flood of these things coming back to you. Well, for me, this experience of this recall of what I could only call or refer to it as either reincarnation or transmogrification of the soul, or whatever you want to call it. To me, otherwise it doesn't make sense to me. Like, because I can't just ignore the fact that I've had these things, and it's not like a dream, it's not like a trance, it's not like a meditation, it's a memory of something. And this has happened to me for many different kinds of things. So now you could still say, well, suppose maybe there isn't, like, for example, you could say, well, reincarnation doesn't necessarily have to mean that there is a god or gods or Thea, right? So you could maybe be an atheist and believe in reincarnation, right? But for me, it comes back to this idea of an essence, of a soul. I don't, because even mathematically, if I was to calculate this, the only way that a person or an individual could do this sort of thing would be if they had a soul. And for me, this is like one of those gray areas. Like it's not just even that I believe. It's like I know, or that I understand that I am more than a body. I am not just a body. And I believe that I have a soul, but I know that I do. You know, I know that I have a soul. So, there you go.